Officer Brian Keller smirked as the trembling 16-year-old Aaliyah Brooks stammered out, "My mom is an Army Special Forces officer." Blood trickled down from Aaliyah's wrist, where the handcuffs had been clamped far too tight, while ElectroHub Megastore's security cameras recorded every second of the scene. The room echoed with mocking laughter, led by Keller himself. At that very moment, the glass doors of the Lone Star Galleria Mall slid open. A woman in plain clothes walked in, simple shirt, dark jeans, her hair neatly tied back. But the aura in her eyes and the authority in her stride shifted the atmosphere instantly. Colonel Camille Brooks. She didn't need a uniform or medals. The sheer force of her presence alone was enough to make every guard in the lobby instinctively stand straighter. Suriero, 26. Keller would regret this day for years to come. But before we dive deeper into this shocking story, let me ask you, where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments below. And if you want more stories where justice is served, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Now imagine this, you're falsely accused, searched in public, your wrists cuffed so tight they bleed, and when you try to tell the truth about your family, people just laugh at you. How would you feel if someone mocked your family's honor and achievements right in front of a crowd? Let's rewind the clock and uncover what happened before Colonel Camille Brooks arrived and changed everything. It was a blazing Saturday afternoon in Houston, Texas. The Lone Star Galleria buzzed with shoppers, streams of people moving in and out, background music echoing through polished hallways. Everything seemed perfectly ordinary until Aaliyah Brooks' footsteps led her into ElectroHub, the largest electronics store in the mall. Aaliyah, just 16, wore a fitted white NASA t-shirt, her petite frame carrying a long checklist filled with scribbled notes, microchips, wires, batteries, and sensors for her STEM class robotics project. She took a deep breath, her eyes shining with determination. For Aaliyah, science wasn't just a subject, it was her passion, her hope, her way out of the prejudice that she and her family faced in a society still riddled with injustice. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C., her mother, Colonel Camille Brooks, was locked in a tense Pentagon briefing. A woman who had endured countless campaigns, she knew the meaning of danger, and she had always reminded her daughter, "No matter where you are, never lose your dignity. You may be misunderstood, even opposed, but truth and justice will always be your strongest weapons." Aaliyah had no idea that within minutes, those very words would become her lifeline, guiding her through a turning point that would change her life forever. Chalker, 107. What seemed like just another ordinary day was about to become the moment that changed everything. Inside the ElectroHub Megastore, bright white lights reflected off the perfectly lined shelves. Upbeat tech music pulsed in the background, blending with the steady beep-beep of barcode scanners. Aaliyah Brooks walked patiently down each aisle, her eyes lighting up every time she spotted a part she needed. In her hand was a small basket, a few microchips, a coil of copper wire, a pack of lithium batteries and infrared sensors for her robotics project. She checked her list, smiling with relief. "Just one more Arduino board, and I'm done." Across the store, a woman entered who instantly drew every eye. Catherine Myers White, in her 40s, golden wavy hair, a sparkling designer handbag dangling from her arm. Her expensive fitted dress and the click of her high heels against the tiled floor radiated the authority of Houston's upper class, a woman far more used to giving orders than asking for anything. In her hand, Catherine carried the latest model, a gold-plated iPhone 15 Pro Max worth nearly $2,000. She juggled between the phone and her shopping bags, her face tightening with irritation. Suddenly, Catherine's shrill scream tore through the buzzing store. "My phone is gone. My brand new $2,000 iPhone is gone. Shodu 30. The entire store froze. Employees stopped mid-scan. Shoppers turned their heads. The upbeat background music seemed to vanish under Catherine's piercing cry. Her sharp green eyes swept the room and landed squarely on Aaliyah. Catherine jabbed a manicured finger, her voice full of certainty. "That girl, it's her. I saw her hanging around here earlier. She took it." The air in the store turned heavy. Shoppers around them stared hard at Aaliyah. Whispers broke out. "She does look suspicious. That kid's been standing near the phone counter for a while. It has to be her." Aaliyah froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, her face burning with a mix of shame and fear. She stammered, fighting to keep her voice steady. No, it's not me. I was just buying parts for my school robotics project. My teacher can vouch for me if you need proof. She lifted her basket, showing the cheap electronic parts nothing that resembled a shiny iPhone. But the eyes of the crowd did not soften. A terrifying silence hung in the air. And within moments, that silence would be shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps, the kind that signaled a nightmare was just about to begin. The ElectroHub staff quickly grabbed the desk phone, their voice trembling as they reported to security. We have a shoplifting case. A customer claims a teenager stole an iPhone. Please send police immediately. The air inside the store grew heavier by the second. Every pair of eyes locked onto Aaliyah as though she had already been convicted. She clutched her shopping basket tighter, forcing herself to breathe deeply, though her legs trembled with fear. Within minutes, the sharp thud of boots echoed across the marble floor. Officer Brian Keller had arrived. Keller, early 40s, broad-shouldered, his police uniform, crisp nameplate gleaming under the lights. His face carried the deep lines of 2 decades on the force. But his cold gray eyes didn't radiate fairness, only prejudice. He walked straight to Catherine Myers. "What happened here, ma'am?" he asked, his deep voice carrying a tone of certainty from the very start. Catherine rushed to him, gripping his arm as if she'd been waiting for rescue. "Officer, it's that girl. She stole my iPhone. I saw her by the phone counter, and then, suddenly, it was gone." Keller nodded as if that alone was enough. His eyes swept over Aaliyah with suspicion, as though she were already guilty. "All right, kid, open your bag. Dump everything on the table now." Aaliyah's voice cracked with panic. "But I didn't take anything. These are just parts for my science project. My teacher can—" Keller cut her off sharply. "No excuses. Dump it. Now." Under the suffocating stares of the crowd, Aaliyah's trembling hands unzipped her bag. She laid each item out on the table: circuit board, copper coil sensors, backup batteries, her worn notebook filled with sketches and formulas. Keller stepped closer, not even bothering to inspect carefully. With a flick of his hand, he knocked the basket over. Parts scattered across the table, clattering to the floor, rolling under shelves. "Oh, science, huh?" Keller sneered. "Looks more like a pile of junk to me." Aaliyah bit her lip hard, her eyes welling with tears. The parts weren't expensive, but she had saved every dollar for weeks to buy them for her robotics project. Seeing them treated like trash stung with humiliation and anger. But more than that, it was the crushing shame of being mocked in front of strangers. Not a single person in the crowd dared to speak up. A few shook their heads, some cast pitying looks, but no one intervened. Meanwhile, Keller folded his arms, his stare firm and final, as if he had already identified his criminal. Aaliyah lifted her chin, staring back at him. Her voice shook, but it carried determination. "I didn't steal anything. I am innocent." Keller's lips curled into a smirk. He glanced sideways at Catherine, almost in agreement, then turned back with icy finality. "We'll see how long you can keep denying it." Inside the ElectroHub security room, the air felt suffocating. Aaliyah's scattered robot parts still lay across the floor, a few tiny chips stuck beneath the desk, silent proof of the absurd injustice unfolding before everyone's eyes. Swallowing hard, her hands trembling, Aaliyah summoned all her courage. Her voice broke as she pleaded, "Please, let me call my teacher. He can confirm I'm working on a science project. I didn't steal anything." Keller narrowed his eyes, his lips curling into a cold smile. "Oh, I'm sure you got some miracle proof, huh? I've heard stories like that 1,000 times." Through the glass wall, the bystanders shook their heads. Murmurs rose. Kids these days lie so easily. If she's innocent, why would the cops be here? Aaliyah's face burned hot, her heartbeat pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Desperate, she blurted out, her voice shaking but firm. "My mom is an Army Special Forces officer. She works at the Pentagon." For a split second, silence blanketed the room. Then Keller broke into a raspy, mocking laugh that echoed off the walls. "Oh, that's rich. Your mom's Special Forces. What's next? Your dad's the President of the United States." He drawled, stretching out each word with dripping contempt. His laughter quickly pulled others in. A couple of guards chuckled. A few stared at Aaliyah, with eyes that mixed pity and ridicule. The way Keller stressed the word family made the sting sharper. Aaliyah realized this wasn't just mockery, it was laced with something more poisonous: discrimination. People like you from families like yours could never have a mother in a high-ranking military post. Blood rushed to her cheeks, tears pricking at her eyes. But she bit down hard on her lip, refusing to collapse in front of the man taunting her. Keller stepped closer, his smirk fading, his tone snapping like a whip. Listen here, kid. People like you always think you can talk your way out of trouble with a few fancy words. I've been doing this for 20 years. I know your type. He pulled out his steel handcuffs and without hesitation clamped them around Aaliyah's wrists. The sharp click rang out, cutting through the room like a blade. Cold metal bit into her fragile skin. Aaliyah winced, struggling to hold back a cry, but dark red drops of blood began seeping from where the cuffs cut too deep. They dripped slowly down her trembling hand, falling onto the polished white floor, humiliation on full display. Outside, the crowd stirred. Some frowned in discomfort. Others turned away, unable to stomach the sight. But not one person stepped in. In Aaliyah's eyes, fear mixed with fury. Is this the price of my skin color? She thought bitterly. If I looked different, would they believe me? The room was drowning in injustice. But to Keller, this was nothing more than just another day on the job. While her daughter was being humiliated in Houston, more than 100 miles away, Colonel Camille Brooks sat inside a fortified Pentagon conference room with top-ranking generals. Spread across the table were satellite maps and tactical charts. The officers debated heatedly over a new training operation, but Camille remained composed, her sharp eyes tracking every detail. She was known for spotting flaws, dissecting numbers, and never overlooking a single error in a plan. Then suddenly, "Roar!" Her military phone buzzed. Camille frowned. During such a critical meeting, no one dared interrupt unless it was truly urgent. Glancing at the screen, her chest tightened. Aaliyah. She excused herself, swiftly stepping into the hallway. Pressing the phone to her ear, her voice was firm, authoritative. Aaliyah, why are you calling me now? You should be at school. On the other end, only sobs and chaotic noise could be heard. Then her daughter's broken voice came through. Mom, they say I stole. They handcuffed me. There's blood. Mom, I'm so scared. Camille froze. The woman who had stared down enemies across war zones, who had remained cold and sharp before generals, now wore a look of shock unlike anything she had ever shown. In her steel eyes flickered the raw pain of a mother. Without hesitation, she turned back into the room. Her voice rang firm and commanding. Gentlemen, I must leave this meeting immediately. My family is facing an emergency. The generals exchanged glances, startled. But the fire in Camille's eyes told them this was no trivial matter. One gave a solemn nod of approval. Camille exited quickly, her hands trembling slightly, as she dialed a trusted friend, Major David Chen, an Asian-American military lawyer. Once her comrade on the battlefield, he was now one of the top legal officers in Washington. The line clicked. David, it's Camille. My daughter's being unlawfully detained in Houston. I need you now. Bring every document, every authority you can. Chen's voice came back without a shred of hesitation. Understood. I'm on my way. Get to Aaliyah first. I'll handle the law. Camille ended the call, drew in a steady breath, and sprinted toward the parking lot. She climbed into her military SUV, the engine roaring to life, tires screeching against the concrete. Her eyes hardened with focus. Years of commanding soldiers in hostile war zones had taught her to remain calm under fire. But now her heart beat not as a colonel, but as a mother racing to protect her child. The long road from Washington, D.C. to Houston stretched before her. Gripping the wheel tightly, Camille whispered to herself, Hold on, Aaliyah. I'm coming, and this time justice will not abandon us. About an hour later, in the bustling rhythm of a Saturday afternoon in Houston, the glass doors of the Lone Star Galleria slid open. A woman stepped inside, dressed in simple civilian clothes, dark jeans, a crisp shirt, and a fitted black blazer. No uniform. No insignia. Yet her presence was impossible to ignore. It was Colonel Camille Brooks. Every step she took was steady, deliberate. Her eyes swept the hallway as if scanning a battlefield. Security staff and mall guards unconsciously straightened their posture, standing taller without anyone telling them to. Camille moved quickly, heading straight toward the security wing of Electro Hub Megastore, the place holding her daughter. Inside the security room, Officer Keller still wore his smug expression. Arms crossed, leaning against the desk, his dull gray eyes carried the same defiant arrogance. Beside him, Catherine Myers stood with a faint, triumphant smirk, pleased to see Aaliyah cuffed. Aaliyah sat curled in the chair, her wrists bruised and raw streaks of dried blood marking her skin. Her eyes brimmed with tears, but behind them flickered a quiet defiance. Then came the sound of footsteps, sharp, deliberate. Clack, clack, clack. Each strike against the floor pulled every gaze toward the door. The door swung open. Camille Brooks entered. For a split second, the entire room seemed to shift. No one knew who she was, but everyone felt it, an invisible weight filling the air. Camille locked eyes with Keller. No greeting, no hesitation. Her voice was low, firm, each word like a hammer strike. "You just detained a minor without the presence of a guardian." Keller's brow furrowed, but before he could respond, Camille cut him off, her tone slicing through the air like a blade. "You acted with no concrete evidence before applying force." She stepped closer. Her piercing gaze made Keller instinctively shift back. "And worst of all, you handcuffed my daughter so tightly you drew blood. That is abuse of power, a direct violation of minor protection policies, and a breach of standard police procedure." Silence fell like a heavy curtain. Aaliyah lifted her head, eyes glowing with newfound hope at the sight of her mother. Catherine Myers fumbled nervously, gripping her designer handbag tighter, her eyes darting around in panic. And Keller, though he fought to keep his hardened posture, sweat glistened on his forehead. His shoulders twitched, betraying the cracks in the mask of arrogance he had been hiding behind. In that small, crowded room, the balance of power had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The door to the security room swung open. A tall, lean man in a dark suit stepped in, strong in presence despite his calm demeanor. Major David Chen, military lawyer and longtime ally of Colonel Camille Brooks. Chen wasted no time. Without a word, he raised a small USB drive and plugged it into the wall-mounted monitor. Instantly, the security camera footage from ElectroHub filled the screen. All eyes locked on the video. Catherine Myers standing at the phone counter, her eyes darting around, flashing with sly intent. With a quick, subtle move, she slipped the iPhone 15 Pro Max into her own handbag. Moments later, she feigned panic, rummaging through the same bag and shrieking, "My phone is gone!" Without hesitation, she pointed straight at Aaliyah, accusing her in front of everyone. The images were crystal clear, every detail undeniable. The room erupted. Whispers surged like a wave. "Oh my God, she set this up. That girl is completely innocent. What a disgraceful act." And then an even sharper blow, a shrill ringtone pierced the tension. Every head turned toward Catherine Myers. Her face drained of color, hands trembling, she dug through her bag. And there it was. Under the harsh glare of the screen, the glittering iPhone 15 Pro Max appeared. The very phone she had claimed was stolen. Its screen flashed with an incoming call. The ringtone echoed through the heavy silence, like the final blade cutting through any remaining defense. Catherine's voice quivered, her words tumbling over themselves. I... It must have been a mistake. Maybe I forgot I put it in there." Camille Brooks' eyes locked on her, cold and unyielding. "A mistake? You destroyed a child's dignity, left her bleeding in handcuffs, and turned an entire store against her. That was no mistake. That was slander." Chen folded his arms, his voice steady and resolute. "The surveillance footage speaks for itself. And now the phone ringing in your own bag. No court in this country will call that a misunderstanding. This is intentional fraud." The room exploded in outrage. Customers outside the glass shouted for justice, some live streaming the moment on their phones, others booing Catherine openly. Inside, Aaliyah sat still, wrists raw and bleeding, but her eyes glimmered with renewed hope. The truth had finally broken through. Catherine Myers stood frozen, her face pale, sweat dripping down her temples. And Officer Keller motionless, clinging to whatever scraps of authority he had left, his hands beginning to tremble. At that moment, the scales of justice tipped decisively, once and for all, toward Aaliyah. Firm footsteps echoed in the hallway. The security room door swung open, revealing a tall man with silver-streaked hair, sun-worn skin, and an unmistakable air of authority. It was Chief Alejandro Ramirez, the Houston police chief. His mere presence was enough to silence the room that had been buzzing just seconds before. Security guards and staff straightened instinctively. Shoppers outside the glass fell quiet, holding their breath. Ramirez scanned the scene. His eyes landed first on the iPhone still in Catherine Meyer's trembling hand, its screen flashing with an incoming call. Then he looked to the surveillance footage still glowing on the monitor, laying bare her false accusation. Finally, his gaze fixed on Aaliyah's wrists, bruised, bloodied, the skin raw from handcuffs. His face darkened. His voice, low yet commanding, cut through the room like an order on the battlefield. "Officer Keller, who authorized you to cuff a minor so tightly that you left her injured like this?" Keller froze. He blinked, scrambling to recover his arrogance, his tone snapping defensively. "She was a theft suspect. I was just following procedure." Ramirez's reply was swift, cold as steel. "What procedure allows you to ignore evidence, bypass guardian protocols, and injure a child? Answer me, Keller." The air grew thick. The crowd outside murmured in hushed excitement. "He's caught now. Justice is coming." Keller's jaw clenched. Sweat glistened on his forehead. The tide was turning against him, but his instinct to fight back burst out in a desperate shout. "Colonel Brooks is interfering with police business. I'll arrest her right now." He yanked out his cuffs and strode toward Camille Brooks. Aaliyah cried out, her voice breaking in terror. "Mom, watch out!" But Camille stood tall, unwavering. Her eyes were calm, her stance unshaken, a pillar of steel in the middle of the storm. Before Keller could reach her, Ramirez stepped forward, blocking his path. His voice dropped sharp and final like a blade drawn. "That's enough, Keller. Hand over your badge and your gun. Right now." The tension snapped to its peak. The room seemed frozen in time. Outside the glass, the crowd held its breath. Everyone knew this was no longer an argument. This was the collapse of a veteran officer's career unraveling in real time before their eyes. Keller stood motionless, the cuffs dangling uselessly in his hand, his face pale. The power he had clung to for 20 long years was slipping away right here in ElectroHub. The air inside the security room was still thick after Chief Ramirez's cold, commanding order. Keller stood frozen, his face pale. Catherine Myers kept her head down, clutching her handbag as if she could sink into the floor. Then hesitantly, a trembling hand rose. All eyes turned. It was Rebecca Torres, a young ElectroHub employee, barely in her 20s. Her face was pale, her eyes nervous, but behind them burned a spark of determination. Her voice shook, but it carried loudly enough for everyone to hear. I need to say something. This isn't the first time. Our manager, Mark Jennings, sent an internal email. In it, he told us to closely monitor Black customers, especially teenagers. We were instructed to pay extra attention to them more than anyone else. A ripple of shock swept the room. Employees exchanged uneasy looks. A few nodded subtly as if acknowledging a truth they had never dared to speak out loud. Rebecca drew in a deep breath, summoning courage. "I still have a copy of that email in my inbox. I can't stay silent anymore. What happened to this girl? What happened to Aaliyah is the direct result of that policy." Colonel Camille Brooks turned toward the young woman. Her eyes, firm yet filled with respect, met Rebecca's. She spoke in a voice steady and clear, each word landing with deliberate weight. "Thank you, Rebecca. And I want everyone here to understand this isn't just about my daughter. This is a systemic issue. When a discriminatory policy is put in place, it doesn't just wound one person, it poisons an entire community." She pivoted, her eyes locking onto Chief Ramirez, her voice sharpening with conviction. "If there hadn't been security footage, if that phone hadn't been found in Mrs. Meyer's bag, my daughter might have been branded a criminal today simply because of her skin color. How many other children have been through this but had no one to stand up for them?" Outside the glass, the crowd grew restless. Murmurs rose to shouts, anger, disbelief, outrage. Unbelievable, they'd actually do this. So this wasn't the first time? ElectroHub has to be held accountable. Phones lifted into the air, recording every second. It was clear now this scandal wouldn't stay contained in the walls of a small security room. It was about to erupt across Houston, and possibly the entire nation. Rebecca lowered her hands, still trembling, but her eyes now steadier than ever. She knew that in that moment she had chosen to stand on the side of truth. What began as a personal false accusation had now detonated into a public reckoning, exposing systemic racism woven into retail security practices. And once truth has been uncovered, it can never be hidden again. Once the chaos inside ElectroHub finally subsided, an ambulance was called. Paramedics entered, carefully unlocking the cuffs from Aaliyah's wrists. Beneath her fragile skin were deep red welts streaked with blood. The sight drew tears from many who had witnessed the ordeal. Aaliyah was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed to Memorial Hospital, Houston, for treatment. On the way out, her eyes clung to her mother, filled with both pain and fragile hope. Camille squeezed her daughter's hand tightly, her voice steady, firm, and resolute. "You did so well, but this isn't over, Aaliyah. This is only the beginning." News spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Videos captured by customers, the footage of Keller cuffing a teenager until she bled, Catherine pulling the iPhone from her own bag, Rebecca exposing the discriminatory, policy-flooded social media. Within hours, the hashtag #Justice for Aaliyah was everywhere on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Civil rights activists demanded a full-scale investigation. Students across Houston universities posted photos holding signs, "We stand with Aaliyah." Parents voiced their outrage. "Today it's Aaliyah. Tomorrow it could be my child." The movement ignited like a fire no one could put out. The legal world took notice as well. Elaine Washington, one of the most prominent civil rights attorneys in Texas, reached out directly to Camille. "I will represent Aaliyah pro bono. This case could set a crucial precedent to end racial discrimination in retail security practices." At the same time, ElectroHub's Houston management team was immediately suspended. The parent company in New York held an emergency meeting, issuing a statement, "We will fully cooperate with authorities to investigate and resolve this matter." But it was too late. The community's trust had already been shattered. That night, when the Brooks family returned home, a heartbreaking sight awaited them. On the brick wall outside their house, someone had spray-painted hateful slogans in dripping red letters. "Go back where you belong. We don't want your kind here." Camille clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with fury. Aaliyah stood frozen, her lips trembling, feeling the sting of hatred invade the very place that was supposed to be her safe haven. But what they didn't know was that this cowardly act would only pour fuel onto the fire of public outrage. From that moment on, Aaliyah's case was no longer just a personal tragedy. It had become a symbol of justice, for Houston and for America. The next morning, as the first rays of sunlight fell on the quiet street where the Brooks family lived, Camille opened her front door and froze. Lined up outside her home stood nearly 20 men and women. Some wore old jackets, others still carried the faded combat uniforms from years gone by. They were Houston veterans, men and women who had once fought under the same flag as Camille on distant battlefields. Now they stood together to protect her and her family. One of them, Sergeant Miller, his hair gray, his voice deep and unwavering, stepped forward. "Colonel Brooks, we heard what happened last night. We can't stand by while a fellow soldier and her family are dishonored like this. Today we're here to clean away those stains." Within minutes, strong hands grabbed brushes and paint, scrubbing away every hateful word from the brick wall. The sharp scent of fresh paint replaced the stench of the old graffiti, and in its place they raised a massive American flag, rippling proudly in the morning breeze. Beneath it they mounted a wooden plaque carved with bold letters, "This family is protected." Neighbors captured the scene on their phones, posting it online. Within hours, the image spread across Houston and beyond state lines. The sight of the American flag waving above the Brooks home, with that fierce message of protection, became a symbol of solidarity. The ripple effect was immediate. Shops, cafes, and supermarkets across Houston posted signs reading, "Safe space, no discrimination." Several schools joined in, hanging the same message on their gates. Local businesses convened meetings, pledging to train their employees against bias. The movement swept through the city like a warm, unstoppable flame. People who had once stayed silent in the face of injustice now stood tall, declaring together, "Enough! We won't let this happen again." Inside the Brooks home, Aaliyah sat by the window, her wrists wrapped in white bandages. She watched quietly as fresh paint covered the cruel words, as the American flag fluttered high as neighbors and veterans stood side by side smiling in support. Tears slipped down her cheeks, this time not from pain or humiliation, but from something greater, the realization that she was not alone. Camille placed a firm, warm hand on her daughter's shoulder, her voice steady and comforting. Do you see, Aaliyah, justice doesn't always arrive instantly, but when a community rises together, it becomes stronger than any hatred. That day, Houston was forever changed. From the humble home of the Brooks family, a movement against injustice and discrimination spread outward, transforming into a fire of unity that embraced the entire city. The incident at ElectroHub Houston was already explosive, but within days the situation escalated when the FBI officially launched an investigation. Federal agents combed through Officer Brian Keller's personal records and digital history. What they uncovered shocked the public. In Keller's private inbox, investigators found numerous emails and messages exchanged with white extremist groups. The content was saturated with hate rants about preserving America's purity, calls to monitor communities of color because of higher crime risk, and even veiled discussions about recruitment within local police departments. At first, the information was kept internal, but it soon leaked. When the press got hold of it, outrage erupted nationwide. What was once dismissed as a single act of misconduct had now spiraled into a national security threat. Questions rang out across the country. If one officer is tied to extremist groups, how many others are doing the same? Are our communities safe when those meant to protect us are the ones targeting us? In the midst of this storm, Colonel Camille Brooks was invited to testify at a special hearing organized by the Homeland Security Committee. Standing before a panel of lawmakers, her voice was steady, her eyes unwavering. What happened to my daughter was not an isolated incident. It is the tip of an iceberg. Thousands of children of color, thousands of families across this nation have faced suspicion, humiliation, and injustice. But they didn't have cameras to prove it, lawyers to defend them, or a voice loud enough to be heard. She paused, took a deep breath, then continued, her tone sharp as steel. If we treat this as the wrongdoing of a few individuals and call it solved, then we are lying to ourselves. This is a systemic problem, and systems only change when we have the courage to confront them and reform them from the ground up. Camille's testimony was broadcast live, spreading across the country and dominating evening news cycles. Journalists called it a call for reform from a mother in uniform. The story was no longer just about Aaliyah Brooks, a teenager falsely accused in Houston. It had become a symbol for thousands of Americans who had endured injustice without ever being heard. A single stone had been thrown into the water, and its ripples were now reaching the entire nation. On the morning of the trial, the entire city of Houston seemed to hold its breath. In front of the Houston Federal Courthouse, hundreds of reporters packed the steps. Cameras and microphones pointed toward the entrance. Shouts echoed, microphones clicked on and off. Chaotic noise but pulsing with urgency. Across the sidewalks, crowds of citizens gathered, raising high their signs. Justice for Aaliyah. End racism now. Protect our children. Their chants thundered in rhythm, mingling with the blare of police sirens directing traffic, weaving a tension so taut it felt ready to snap. Inside a black SUV parked near the courthouse steps, Aaliyah Brooks sat silently, her small hands clenched tightly together. Her wrists were still bandaged, but the real ache wasn't in the wounds. It was the fear gnawing at her chest. This would be the first time in her life she would stand before the public, before a judge, lawyers, and millions of viewers watching on live broadcasts. Beside her, Camille reached over and clasped her daughter's hands. Her voice was low, warm, so different from the commanding tone of a special forces officer. All you need to do is tell the truth, Aaliyah. Nothing more, nothing less. The truth is your strongest weapon. Aaliyah lifted her eyes toward her mother. Worry still flickered in them, but now it was mixed with a fragile but growing faith. Mom, what if they don't believe me? She whispered, her voice soft as a breeze. Camille's grip tightened, her gaze firm and unshakable. They will believe you, because this time you are not alone. You have the law, you have the community, and you have me. Outside, the chant, "Justice for Aaliyah," rolled like ocean waves against the courthouse walls. This was no longer just a trial. It had become a public battle for justice. When the court staff opened the SUV door, Aaliyah inhaled deeply and stepped out. Flashbulbs exploded in a storm of light reporters shouting questions in a frenzy. She faltered for just a moment, but her mother's steady hand on her shoulder gave her strength. She straightened, drawing in a full breath. Today she was no longer just a teenager falsely accused. Today she was the voice of thousands who had once been silenced in the face of injustice. And now that voice was about to be heard in the courtroom. The courtroom doors opened. The judge gave a nod and Aaliyah Brooks stepped up to the witness stand. Cold, bright lights fell across her face, still so young, yet now hardened with determination. Her wrists were wrapped in white bandages, with faint streaks of red seeping through unshakable proof of the terrifying afternoon at ElectroHub. The room was packed. Reporters, citizens, civil rights activists filled the benches. The noise faded into absolute silence as every eye turned to the 16-year-old girl. The court clerk asked, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Aaliyah swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I do." She drew in a deep breath and began. "That day I only went to ElectroHub to buy robot parts for my science class. I had been saving money for weeks. That was all I cared about." At first her voice shook, breaking with nerves. But then her eyes found her mother Camille in the front row, nodding in quiet encouragement. Slowly Aaliyah steadied herself. A woman, Mrs. Catherine Myers, suddenly screamed that she lost her phone. She pointed straight at me, said I had taken it. I was so shocked I couldn't even speak. I tried to explain, but no one listened. The courtroom was utterly still. Aaliyah's gaze shifted toward Catherine Myers, who sat at the defendant's table with her head bowed low. Then Aaliyah continued, her voice firmer now. "When Officer Keller arrived, I thought he would listen, but instead, he mocked me. I said I could call my teacher to confirm what I was doing. He told me that was just an excuse. I was so desperate that I blurted out that my mom was Special Forces, and then he laughed, saying maybe my dad was the President of the United States." A wave of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Some people shook their heads, others frowned in outrage. Aaliyah inhaled deeply, her eyes glistening, but her voice no longer trembling. "He didn't just doubt me. He disrespected my family and the color of my skin. Then he handcuffed me so tight that blood ran down my wrists. I will never forget that feeling. The feeling of being humiliated, treated like a criminal, when I had done nothing wrong." A heavy silence blanketed the room. Even the clacking of reporters' keyboards stopped. Every gaze, judge, jury, audience was locked on the 16-year-old girl. Then Aaliyah lifted her head, her voice ringing clearer than ever. "Today I stand here not just to defend myself. I stand here for everyone who has ever been suspected, ever been treated unfairly, but never had the chance to be heard." The room was breathless. From the back rows, tears slipped quietly down a few cheeks. In that moment, Aaliyah was no longer a fragile teenager. She was a witness for justice, a flame newly lit. After Aaliyah's testimony, the judge gave a solemn nod. The prosecutor rose, his voice ringing clearly through the courtroom. "Your Honor, we now present direct evidence from ElectroHub's security camera system on the day in question." The lights dimmed. A large screen above flickered on. The footage played Catherine Myers at the phone display counter, her eyes darting suspiciously before she slipped the iPhone 15 Pro Max into her own handbag. Moments later, she feigned panic, rummaging through the same bag, then shouted, "My phone is gone!" Without hesitation, she pointed directly at Aaliyah, accusing her before everyone present. The courtroom froze in disbelief. Then murmurs broke out. "My God, she really staged it. That girl was innocent from the start." But it didn't stop there. The footage shifted to inside the security room. Officer Keller violently dumping out Aaliyah's basket, scattering and damaging her robotics parts. Keller mocking her when she mentioned her mother. And finally, Keller clamping the handcuffs so tightly that blood dripped from her wrists. The courtroom erupted with gasps and furious whispers. Some spectators openly wept at the undeniable injustice on display. The prosecutor's voice cut through the uproar, firm and commanding. "And that is not all. Please direct your attention to the internal email provided by ElectroHub employee Rebecca Torres." The screen changed, displaying a clear, damning email sent by Mark Jennings, Houston, branch manager. "All security staff are instructed to closely monitor Black customers, particularly teenagers. We must reduce losses by keeping tighter watch on this group compared to others. A wave of outrage crashed through the courtroom. The gallery burst into angry shouts. I can't believe they put that in writing. This is systemic racism. Catherine Myers sat frozen, her face drained of color. Her trembling hands clenched a handkerchief, unable to lift her head. As for Officer Keller, who had sat with his arms crossed defiantly since the trial began, sweat now poured down his forehead. His eyes darted nervously around the room, lost and shaken. The truth could no longer be hidden. Everyone in that courtroom saw it clearly. This was no mistake. It was a deliberate frame-up, supported by a system built on racial discrimination. After Mark Jennings' email was revealed, the courtroom still buzzed with outrage. The judge banged the gavel for order, then gave a firm nod to the prosecutor to proceed. The next witness, Luis Martinez, another ElectroHub employee, stepped onto the stand. Dressed in a plain shirt, his voice trembled at first, but his eyes carried resolve. I confirm what Rebecca Torres testified is true. We were repeatedly reminded informally to pay special attention to Black customers, especially teenagers. There was no official memo beyond the email, but during internal meetings, Manager Jennings often emphasized that group is more likely to cause trouble. We all understood what he meant. We were expected to profile even when there was no suspicious behavior at all. He paused, glanced at Aaliyah, then continued slowly. I saw her that day. She was focused only on picking out parts for her robotics project. She was completely harmless. Immediately after, another witness was called, James O'Connor, a former Marine veteran who happened to be in ElectroHub that day. His face was worn from years of service, but his eyes were sharp with conviction. James stood tall, his voice unwavering. I witnessed Officer Keller handcuffing that girl with my own eyes. I was shocked by the level of force he used on a small teenager who wasn't resisting. Yet he tightened the cuffs until her wrists bled. I served in the military for years. I know what necessary force looks like. This was not necessary force. This was abuse of power. A rumble of agreement spread through the courtroom. The prosecutor nodded, signaling to the clerk. The screen lit up again, this time showing a still photograph, Aaliyah's wrist wrapped in white bandages, fresh blood seeping through. A collective gasp swept the gallery. Many covered their mouths. Some broke down in tears. At that moment, Catherine Myers, pale as a ghost since the trial began, suddenly shot to her feet, stammering, I didn't mean to. It was a misunderstanding. I panicked. I thought the girl, but the prosecutor cut her off, his tone sharp as steel. A misunderstanding. You slipped the phone into your own bag, staged a fake scene, and pointed your finger at a child. The cameras caught it, and the phone rang inside your bag. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate act of slander. Catherine collapsed back into her chair, trembling, her lips quivering, without another word of defense. Just seats away, Officer Keller. His face flushed red, suddenly snapped, his voice strained and bitter. I was just following procedure. I handled it the same way I always do. The prosecutor spun toward him, eyes cutting like a blade. What procedure, Officer Keller? What procedure allows you to ignore evidence? To strip a minor of her guardian rights? To tighten cuffs until she bleeds? What procedure authorizes mocking the heritage and family of an innocent citizen? Keller opened his mouth, but no words came out. The courtroom fell into absolute silence. All that remained was the image of Aaliyah sitting quietly. Her wrists bandaged, her eyes shining bright, living proof of an injustice too long hidden. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath, every eye fixed on Catherine Myers. At the defense table, she clutched her handkerchief so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her face had gone pale, and even the thick layer of makeup could not mask the fear rising inside her. The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice ringing clear, each word like a hammer, striking through the heavy silence. Mrs. Myers, answer this directly. Are you willing to swear before this court that your iPhone was stolen by Aaliyah Brooks? The silence was so sharp, the sound of heartbeats seemed almost audible. Catherine trembled, her eyes darting toward Keller, toward the gallery, then down to the floor. Her lips fumbled, words stumbling out. I might have been mistaken. The hesitant words fell like a blade slicing through the wall of lies. The courtroom erupted. Gasps and angry voices rang out. Mistaken a child's life and dignity, nearly destroyed because of a mistake. That wasn't a mistake, that was deliberate. The judge banged the gavel, repeatedly calling for order, but the atmosphere surged with tension that refused to settle. The prosecutor seized the moment, his tone sharper than ever. Mistaken Mrs. Myers, the cameras recorded you putting the phone in your own bag. The iPhone rang inside your purse in the security office. And still you would swear this wasn't a false accusation? Answer this court. Do you swear under law and under your honor that you did not fabricate this charge? Catherine recoiled, unable to lift her head. Sweat trickled down her temples. Her hand shook violently as she gripped the handkerchief, but no words left her lips. In that moment, everyone in the room understood. Catherine Myers had collapsed. The prosecutor turned to the judge and jury, his voice firm and resonant. Your Honor, the witness has contradicted her own testimony. She cannot swear to uphold her accusation. That means her charge against Aaliyah Brooks is entirely baseless and in fact a deliberate act of slander. The judge nodded gravely, jotting down notes before lifting his eyes to the jury box. The room fell into a suffocating hush. Every breath was held, every heart heavy with anticipation. Everyone knew the moment of reckoning was now just within reach. The air in the courtroom was tense, like a bomb about to explode. Catherine had already crumbled, her head bowed, unable to meet anyone's eyes. And now, all attention shifted to Officer Brian Keller. The prosecutor stepped forward calmly, setting a thick file down on the table. The heavy thud echoed, making Keller flinch slightly. Opening the file, the prosecutor's voice was steady, but carried undeniable authority. Your Honor, we now present the disciplinary record and complaints against Officer Keller during his 20 years of service. He flipped through the pages, reading each line, his tone growing heavier. 2012 complaint from a 14-year-old black boy alleging excessive force by Officer Keller with no evidence of wrongdoing. 2016. A Latina woman reported Officer Keller for discriminatory treatment during questioning. 2019. The son of a black serviceman was wrongfully detained by Officer Keller. The case was quietly buried after an internal settlement. With each entry, the air in the courtroom thickened. Finally, the prosecutor closed the file, his voice cutting sharp. This is not a single mistake. This is a pattern of behavior, violence, bias, and cover-ups. And this time, Your Honor, there is nothing left to hide. Keller sat rigid in his chair. His face flushed red, sweat dripping down his forehead in streams. He swallowed hard, his fists clenched tight, but no words. No defense came out. The gallery erupted in outrage. My God, he's been doing this for years and got away with it. Now it's clear. This wasn't an accident. This was his habit. The judge struck the gavel, calling for silence, then fixed his gaze directly on Keller. His voice carried like thunder, slow and deliberate, heavy enough to still the entire room. Officer Keller, the evidence shows you have repeatedly violated the standards of your profession, committing blatant abuses of power. This time you inflicted injury on an innocent teenager and enabled a deliberate act of slander. These are serious offenses. They cannot and will not be tolerated. The judge then turned to Catherine Myers. Mrs. Myers, your deliberate act of slander nearly destroyed a child's life. You will be held accountable under the law for perjury and malicious false accusation. Finally, his eyes moved to the company's representatives. ElectroHub, for your racially discriminatory surveillance policies and lack of transparency, you will face the maximum administrative penalties. Furthermore, the entire Houston management team is suspended and placed under investigation. The courtroom erupted in applause and chants. Justice for Aaliyah! Justice for Aaliyah! Sitting in the front row, Aaliyah's eyes brimmed with tears, this time tears of relief. Beside her, Camille gripped her daughter's hand and whispered softly, You did it. The truth has won. The judge's gavel struck 3 times, echoing through the hushed courtroom. He looked at each of the defendants in turn, then delivered his ruling. Officer Brian Keller, this court finds you guilty of abuse of authority, excessive use of force, and gross violation of protections for minors. You are hereby stripped of your badge, permanently barred from serving in law enforcement, and will face a prison sentence. A collective gasp swept through the room. Keller sat frozen, his face drained of all color, his eyes hollow like a man stripped of everything. Mrs. Catherine Myers. The judge continued his tone, firm and unyielding. This court finds you guilty of slander and perjury before public authorities. You are sentenced to community service probation under supervision and a permanent mark on your record. You are also ordered to compensate the Brooks family for emotional damages. Catherine collapsed into her chair, tears streaming down her face, every trace of pride shattered. Finally, the judge turned to the representatives of ElectroHub. ElectroHub is held accountable for its racially discriminatory management and training policies. This court orders financial compensation and mandates corporate reforms, anti-bias training, independent oversight, and the establishment of a community review board to ensure such incidents never happen again. The company's representative nodded, voice trembling. We will fully comply. The tension that had gripped the courtroom finally broke, replaced by a wave of relief. Applause erupted, some wept openly. But the most powerful moment was yet to come. The judge turned toward Aaliyah. "Young lady, would you like to say a few words before we close this trial?" Aaliyah rose, her hands clasped tightly together. At first her voice shook, but as she spoke it grew steadier, clear, strong, undeniable. "I don't want anyone else to go through what I went through. Justice should never depend on the color of your skin. Every child, no matter their race, no matter where they come from, deserves respect and deserves to feel safe." For a moment the courtroom was silent, every word hanging in the air, like truth carved in stone. Then came the applause, long, thunderous, unending. People wiped tears from their eyes. Camille placed a proud hand on her daughter's shoulder, her eyes shining with fierce pride. And there stood Alia, no longer just a teenager once falsely accused, but a symbol of hope, justice, and change. The judge adjusted his glasses, his voice ringing out firm and resolute, each word falling like the hammer of justice. "Officer Brian Keller, this court finds you guilty of violating civil rights and abusing your authority. You are permanently stripped of your badge and sentenced to prison. Mrs. Catherine Myers, this court finds you guilty of slander. You are sentenced to probation under community supervision and must issue a public apology as well as pay restitution to the Brooks family. ElectroHub is hereby ordered to undergo full reform, abolish discriminatory policies, implement mandatory anti-bias training, and submit to oversight by an independent community board for the next 5 years." The gavel struck, bang. The courtroom erupted. Applause thundered through the chamber and chants of "Justice for Aaliyah" rose like waves. Tears streamed down the faces of many, relief finally breaking through. Weeks later, Aaliyah returned to Westwood High School. As she walked down the hallway, a strange hush followed her. Dozens of eyes watched. Whispers rippled softly. Then suddenly her closest friends rushed forward, wrapping her in a tight embrace. "Welcome back, Aaliyah." Other classmates, some who had only ever stayed silent before, now stepped up to shake her hand, smiling, some even saying, "You were so brave. Because of you, people in this city are starting to think differently." Aaliyah smiled gently, her eyes glistening. For the first time in weeks, she felt truly welcome. Yet not everything had changed overnight. A few students still whispered behind her back, some sneering with cruel jabs. "There goes the justice star." She turned all of Houston upside down over a phone. The invisible daggers still stung. But Aaliyah took a deep breath, remembering her mother's proud gaze in the courtroom, remembering the thunderous applause when she declared, "Justice should never depend on the color of your skin." She lifted her head higher and kept walking, this time with greater strength than before. From a distance, Camille watched her daughter and gave a small nod. She knew Aaliyah's journey would still face hurdles. But one thing had changed forever. Her daughter was no longer alone. And Houston and the nation would never be the same again. Aaliyah's story did not end in the Houston courtroom. Within just a few months, the case had ignited a nationwide debate on discrimination in retail security. In Washington, D.C., a special congressional hearing was convened. Aaliyah and her mother, Colonel Camille Brooks, were invited as key witnesses. The chamber was packed with lawmakers, reporters, and civil rights leaders. When Aaliyah stepped up to the microphone, the image of a 16-year-old girl with her wrists still wrapped in white bandages appeared live on television screens across America. Her voice shook at first, but then rose strong and unwavering. "No one Not even a teenager buying parts for a science project should be treated like a criminal because of their skin color. Justice must be justice for all, or it isn't justice at all. The room fell into absolute silence, then erupted in thunderous applause. From this moment, a new bill was introduced in Congress aimed directly at ending racial profiling in commercial security. Its main provisions included banning all forms of surveillance based on race or appearance, requiring major retail corporations to establish independent human rights oversight boards, mandating that all customer complaints of discrimination be resolved within 30 days with full transparency. Lawmakers called it the Aaliyah Bill, a reminder that change can begin with the voice of a single teenager. Facing public outrage and court-ordered penalties, ElectroHub had no choice but to act. The company's CEO appeared on national television, bowing his head in apology. He announced a sweeping reform program, mandatory anti-bias training for every employee from security guards to top executives, a community oversight committee including civil rights representatives, a new scholarship fund for students of color in STEM named the Aaliyah Brooks Scholarship. The announcement was welcomed, but the community remained vigilant. "We will be watching, words are not enough." Across America, other retail chains began reviewing their policies. Schools and community centers invited Aaliyah to speak to share her experience and inspire young people. At a national youth forum, Aaliyah stood on stage, her eyes bright, her voice clear and commanding. "I never chose to be a symbol. I only chose to tell the truth. But if the truth can change something, then I will never be silent again." The hall filled with thousands of young people rose to their feet, clapping and chanting her name. That day it became clear Aaliyah's story was no longer just a personal ordeal. It had become the spark of a nationwide movement for social reform. One crisp autumn morning, the courtyard of Westwood High School was decorated with flags and banners. Students filled the bleachers, teachers stood in neat rows, and the atmosphere buzzed with excitement. So different from an ordinary day. On the small stage set up in the middle of the courtyard, the principal took the microphone, his voice deep and emotional. "Today we are not only honoring an outstanding student, we are honoring courage and resilience." Aaliyah Brooks stood up, faced injustice, and became the voice for thousands of other young people. Aaliyah stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Friends who once stayed silent when she was falsely accused now cheered, chanting her name. Some teachers quietly wiped away tears. She wore a simple dress. Her wrists still bore faint scars. Standing before hundreds of eyes, Aaliyah bowed slightly, her smile shy, but her gaze shining bright. A representative from a major technology organization, the Future Tech Foundation, walked up and presented Aaliyah with a special scholarship to encourage her to keep pursuing her passion for STEM. They raised a large certificate that read, "Future Innovator Scholarship," awarded to Aaliyah Brooks, a symbol of courage and justice. The audience exploded into a storm of applause that seemed endless. Holding the microphone, Aaliyah's voice was soft, but full of emotion. "I never thought I would be standing here today. There was a time when I felt the world had turned its back on me. But thanks to my mom, my community, my teachers, and my friends, I learned that truth always has power, and I promise to use this opportunity to keep studying, so that one day I too can bring justice through science and technology." For a moment, the entire courtyard fell silent. Then cheers erupted like a wave crashing across the school. That day, Aaliyah was no longer just a student at Westwood High. She became the pride of Houston, a living reminder that even from the darkest shadows, the light of justice can shine.